Management 3130, Principles of Management. This is session 27. For the first time, I'm filming from a satellite classroom. That's a fancy name for my deck. We are under that shelter at home thing, and although I can go to school without any sort of problem or concern, I'm working at home a lot. So, Session 27, in just a moment, I'll be presenting the material in chapter 16 in the text. That is the last chapter in the text. However, we still have much more to do. Foreseeably, I'll be recording at least 2 more videos. I'll record one soon on that critical thinking exercise called the theory of overtaking. I've already put that up on Folio, both the actual schematic and some instructions, but I think it'll be time well spent for me to sit here in front of you and share my how we do that, my expectations. And then the other one, inevitably, is I will do some sort of a wrap-up video, something that is meant to bring the semester to a graceful close, and in that we'll talk a little bit about summer of 20 and fall. Right now, in the last couple of days or so, I got 2 things up on your Folio page. I got the 4th midterm. It is there now. Jump on it, and the due date is on the test. And I also got, as I mentioned just a moment ago, I got that critical thinking exercise, the theory of overtaking up. Minor point, the best use of that exercise is as a group decision-making exercise, but we're in a situation where we've been robbed of that opportunity. So it's very easy for me to convert it to an individual exercise, and that is how the instructions play it out. The reason that I'd set aside 3 class periods, if you look in the original syllabus, the first class period dedicated to the theory of overtaking, I was going to put the schematic on the board and give you clear instructions on what the task is. Plus, I was going to form groups. And then the second day, the second session, would have been you working in the classroom in groups, not, exchanging cell phone numbers and trying to do it remotely or off campus. But I set aside class time. And then the third day, we were going to have an interactive discussion. You would have been seated with your group, and I would ask each group for a contribution. It's always fun and productive, but again, we don't have that. So you have those 3 sessions to make a competent presentation and then get it uploaded on Folio. The last thing I want to mention, I've had a couple of people send me emails, and I'm really sorry that it's not clear, it being the final exam. The instructions are up. There's a standalone video. It's relatively short, I guess maybe 12 or 13 minutes. There's a standalone video that says Management 3130, Guidance on Final Exam. Please watch it. The moment you have watched the video, you can begin working on your final. My expectations are a page or so for each of the 2 questions. Your final exam has 2 essay questions, and the video makes it clear what the questions are and how I think you should approach them. So the moment you see it, you can begin the final. You do not need to wait until, of course it is due, whatever that date shows in the syllabus. I've forgotten the day in May, but I must have it by then because I have to grade them and turn in grades. So your final is up, it's active now. So let me jump on chapter 27, or forgive me, chapter 16, session 27. This is a chapter about control systems and quality management. And there's not much of a dovetail. Those 2 things don't tend to integrate or support each other. But I have no misgivings that they're presented in the same chapter. I'm going to introduce something that appears at the end of the chapter right now, and there's a reason for that. Gee, imagine that. My plans are to teach another maybe 6 or 7 years as an active member of this faculty. I don't know God's plan for me, but that's my plan. However, there's a possible career opportunity that's being presented to me. Y'all probably know a few weeks ago, Tom Brady left the Patriots for Tampa Bay. Well, Belichick has been on the phone to me twice a day. The man is just wearing me out. He wants me to take Brady's place. And I see some value in that. We're having active conversations. He hasn't hit my mark yet on money. But if I accept the position, what I'll do is I won't even take a leave of absence. I'll just teach online. I may have to do this stuff in a practice uniform, but if I take the position, And the fall turns out as I would expect it to be. In the fall of 20, I would be the only 72-year-old Super Bowl winning quarterback in the NFL if I take the job with the Patriots. So I may stay here for another 6 or 7 years, or I may have to buy a private jet and fly back and forth to Boston and whatever they do in the NFL. Faculty are stinking rich, so we can afford private jets. Now, let me jump back to the text. This is the early part of chapter 16. The authors, start off by defining control. And they say control has 3 pieces. You monitor performance, you compare the actual results with the goals or the standards that you set forth, and then, if need be, you take corrective action. That is not always true. For example, what if we did a budget and we set our sales for this particular period we thought would be 2x, and they turned out to be 3x? Well, that's good news, isn't it? That's not a negative outcome. So we had a deviation from what was expected, but it was a positive one. There's no corrective action to take. But the reality is most control systems would show some sort of a shortcoming, some sort of a deficiency. I'll give you an utterly simple example, one that works for an awful lot of companies, and I experienced this when I was practicing in Atlanta. Many of my client companies had company cars, and I had a few that had relatively small fleets. Well, one of the client companies that I had that ran a fleet of motor vehicles was in industrial metals reclamation. That's a fancy term for scrap dealing. And they had big accounts like Miller Beer and people like that, and they would stage trailers at these factories. And the factories, when they had scrap aluminum or whatever the non-ferrous metal was, would throw it in the trailers, and when the trailers were full, the factory would call my client. They'd send a tractor out with an empty trailer, drop the empty, hook up the full one, and go back, and then start the whole process of sorting and separating and processing the metals. So this particular company probably had 40 tractors and maybe in excess of 200 trailers. So it had a fairly substantial fleet of rolling stock. And all the drivers had gas cards. Actually, that's a goofy term because all the trucks were diesels. They had fuel cards. Now, I have a fuel card, so does one other member of my family, but it's a private thing, and it's a commercial fueling station here in town. But I want to tell you about how this control things works with something as simple and as fundamental as a gas card. What if I worked for you and I had a company car and I'm only supposed to use it for business? I don't get to commute to and from work. I don't take it on family vacations. I don't take it to the range. I just use it during work hours, doing whatever it is that I do for our firm. And you give me a gas card, and let me make this up. I could do this simplistically. Let's say that I have, this is just a Ford pickup truck that's a work truck, and in town it gets 16 miles a gallon. So every time I go to a fuel station, I have to enter my card, my driver number, and the odometer reading. So is it possible, if I were an evil, devious man, that I could put in bogus numbers? It is. It's entirely possible. And if I did that, what that means is that I could potentially be selling fuel to a friend at $1 a gallon. He just pumps at the same time. I could bring my wife's car, my daughter's car. You see my point? I could divert company resources to my personal benefit. Wrong. That is a pure form of theft. And how tough is it for somebody in accounting to walk out into the yard and open the door of my truck and look at the odometer reading? So here's a what if. What if in a given month I traveled for work 320 miles? They have a beginning and ending odometer reading. The difference is 320. Just driving around town working. The reason I picked that is I said my truck gets 16 miles a gallon. So unless I embarrass myself, that means I should have purchased 20 gallons. But what if my gas card shows 180 gallons? You see my point? There's almost always some independent, some external validation of anything we do, because so many things in business are interrelated. Nothing exists in isolation. There's always some interrelationship. So in the case of the gas card, the standards are I only use it for work. The company can look and see what work miles I drove, and then they can look at the fuel consumption, and in this instance, see that I was a rat, a thief. And I promise you, I'll be fired and I'll be prosecuted, because that is theft. It's a criminal event. It's not bad judgment. It's criminal activity. So I know gas cards represent a simple example, but you saw how easily I could present that to you. That's control. You monitor performance, you compare with the goals, and then if there is a deviation, you take corrective action. Now, the next thing they talk about in the text is a really powerful concept, and that is the concept of adaptation. And I'm not really entirely sure why that fits in with the discussion about control systems and quality management, but I'm not distressed about that. I think I've shared with you before that I think that may be the single most powerful skill that you and I can develop, is the ability to adapt. Because every one of us has plans. I have plans for this afternoon, so do you. Well, I plan to be teaching in a classroom today. Oh dear, I have no control over the external environment, do I? Neither do you. So, though we may have plans, our plans are often disrupted by forces over which we have no control. So the ability to adapt is just, it's stunningly powerful. If I had the power, I would make that a gift to every one of you. Adaptation is probably the single most important skill that you can ever develop. So, the discussion about adaptation, there are people who would say to you it's a decision-making model, and I don't challenge that, except to say that if we're talking about adaptation, virtually all of your decisions will be done in real time with imperfect information. Adaptation is less of a decision-making model than it is an action sequence. Here's what I must do now in this order. So I don't dispute, you could argue that it's a decision-making model, but if that's true, your decision is being made in the moment, in real time, and you have inaccurate or imperfect information. So the first thing you do if you have to adapt, something happens. We get thrown off campus. So the first thing you do is an assessment. What is this challenge in front of me? What is the task? What do I have to accomplish? And it's critical that you do that thoughtfully, because if you misidentify the task or the challenge, everything you do after that will be maladaptive. It won't match up with whatever is needed. So the first thing you do in adaptation is you make a quick assessment of what's going on. I now have to convert all my face-to-face classes to online. That wasn't that tough, was it? Now, the next thing you do, again, almost in real time, what resources are available to me? What resources do I need? For example, time is a profoundly important resource. If you have no time, if you have this time compression, that forces you to make choices that you wouldn't make if you had more time. Because sometimes you need other people as a resource, sometimes material like things, sometimes money, sometimes access to experts or distribution channels. So you look at this new challenge, you say, okay, what precisely do I have to accomplish? The second thing you do is you look at your resource set. Now, if I have no time, I have to do it myself. Would you agree? If I have to act now, I can't call a friend, I can't go get a rifle, I've got to, whatever it is, I've got to respond right now. So the second thing you do in this process, this action sequence, what are my resources? What do I need to accomplish this goal, and what do I have? The third thing you do, again, in real time, you scroll through what are the solutions that I could enact? I can't know because we're talking about an abstract situation. But most of us could pretty easily think, well, I could get in the car and drive away. I could, you're driving downtown and you have a tire blowout. Can you change it yourself? Can you drive on the rim? Could you call AAA? 3 actions, which one is the best? So you very quickly develop a set of probable solutions. What makes sense in the context? Here's one that I did when I was doing this adaptation thing the week of spring break, when we as faculty knew that everything was going online for the rest of the spring semester. This will go quickly, but I think you'll see. The first thing I thought about is on our Folio platform, we have WebEx, and WebEx permits an interactive messaging. But maybe this is not true in other places, but where we are, it's Southern, we have terrible connectivity. People have difficulty getting in, the screen freezes, you can't get audio, people get dropped. So WebEx is terrible. We don't even use it in the department anymore. If we have departmental meetings, we have other platforms. So I ruled out WebEx, even though it's embedded in Folio. So the next thing I thought about, this was in the course of, this whole thing I'm talking about happened inside of 4 or 5 minutes. So the next thing I said, okay, let me come up with an interactive platform. So I thought about Zoom, I thought about Google Hangouts, and then I thought, whoa, Norton, time out. These kids aren't sitting in front of you at 3:30 in the afternoon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They are scattered all over this nation doing all kinds of stuff because their lives are disrupted. They may have gone home. They may be caregivers. They may be working part-time. They may be working 2 jobs. I don't know. But my point is, you're not sitting in room 1104 at 3:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays every week. So I could not ask you to toggle in and make a contribution or to answer a question because your lives have been as disrupted as mine has been. So I thought to myself, well, gosh, I don't need an interactive platform. So I thought, I want something that's accessible, reliable, the whole deal. And I thought, what the heck? YouTube. So you know this because you've been on it for a couple of weeks now. I opened a YouTube channel. I probably put up about 22 videos now or something like that. And that is, of course, across all my classes. But the point is, I record with an iPad mini. I upload it to Swivel. That's the video app that I'm using to film these things. I upload it to the Swivel website, to their cloud. I then download it to my hard drive on my home computer, and then I just upload it to the YouTube channel. And it typically is available to you the next day. They have people scan the content and change it to some other format. But my point is, my choice of YouTube, it's accessible from anywhere in the nation or perhaps the world. You can use any device, phone, laptop, iPad, whatever the case may be. And it's just as reliable as a stone. So, you see my point? I just took you through the various, I considered 4 platforms. And I dismissed one because we've had terrible experiences with it. When I thought about the next 2, I thought, I can't ask these kids to interact. I can't have them at a particular time of day toggle in and talk to me. So I chose YouTube, and I know it's asynchronous. I know I talk, you listen. I hate it. I wish we were in the room together. I miss our interaction. I really do. But I believe that in this context, in this situation, that it was the best decision. So my point is that I developed a set of solutions, then I chose the one that I thought was best, and I implemented it. That's adaptation. Assess. What is the task? What is the challenge? What are my resources? What are probable solutions? Which one is best? Pull the trigger. That's adaptation. And that will serve you well in life, I promise you. So now, we talk about steps in the control process. To some degree, this is revisiting the definition. But the first thing they say, the author says, is they establish standards. Think about this. If you're in production, I can promise you, you're going to have standards for time, for units of production, for scrap, for quality. You'll have a variety of metrics, a number of measures that your company's going to be looking at. So somebody establishes standards, and it should be in collaboration with you because you're the person doing it. If somebody sets goals that are unachievable, hello, Earth calling, they're unachievable. So the next thing you do is you measure performance, whether it's a sales report for the week or the month or whatever the case may be. You measure performance. Now, when you compare the actual performance with what was projected, there will almost always be a variance, some deviation. If it's positive, you cheer. Hallelujah. If it's negative, you look into it. You say, what explains this? Why did we commit more time or waste more raw materials or whatever the case may be? And then, if you can identify the problem, if you can competently identify the problem, what explains this adverse outcome, then oftentimes it's easy to develop a solution. If you identify the problem, you can usually come up with a competent response. Now, the next topic that the authors introduce is they talk about controlling the supply chain. Oh my goodness. I would be hard pressed to drive up and down any road and point to any business that does not have to manage a supply chain. I could be talking physicians' offices, it doesn't matter. Everybody has to manage a supply chain. And for some people, it's enormous. So I want to talk about this. I'll use a retailer in the context of managing a supply chain. Let's assume that you and I are middle managers. We're not fresh faces. We've been there 4, 5, 6 years, and we've ridden to middle management, and we make some important analytics and some important recommendations, and in some cases, some decisions. So we're big box retailers. We're Walmart people, or Lowe's, or Target, or somebody like that. We're big box retailers.
So I want you to think about some of the implications of managing a supply chain. What if you're a retailer, whatever you sell, and you have way more inventory than you need? I had a client in Atlanta that had a retail sporting goods store. His first year or two of business, he was only turning the inventory over once a year. What that meant is he had this enormous sum of money invested in stuff that sat in the store. And I believed, I looked at other companies in the same industry, sporting goods, and I found that their turnover, their retail turn, 4 to 6 times a year. And every time the inventory turns, you make a gross profit. Fair? So that's a very big deal. And he changed some stuff about the composition of his inventory and his marketing, and he was much more successful. But my point is, inventory has enormous costs. It isn't just buying the stuff. You have to have a facility. Part of the facility is retail. It's display area, it's cashier lanes, things like that. Part of it is what you would call warehousing. And you have to be able to move the material, don't you? So you have to have rack and shelving systems. You have to have some capability, whether it's an automated guide vehicle or a forklift or whatever the case may be. You have to have people. So you spend money on the inventory. Now you have to house it. You're paying rent or the ownership costs of a building. You're paying insurance to insure it. You're paying the cost of utilities. You're paying staff. You have related equipment, materials handling systems, and rack and shelving and things like that. And there are other costs to having too much inventory. What if it becomes obsolescent? You have to mark it down. So that squeezes your gross profit. What if there is what is classically called shrinkage, theft? That happens often. Not occasionally, but often. So too much inventory is a stupid thing to do. Turn that coin upside down. On the other side of too much inventory is you're out of stock. So, quick example. Let's assume I have a pair of tan slacks and I spill something on them and it stains them or I tear them or who knows what. So I have to go get another pair of tan slacks. So I race over to Joseph A. Banks to buy a pair of British tan dress slacks. Pleated front cuffs, because that's what I like for dress slacks. And in my example, they don't have them. So I think, darn, I'm not going to buy anything else. I have a relatively complete wardrobe. I need tan dress slacks. So I leave and I come back in a couple of weeks later when it's convenient. Still out. Now, here's my question to you. You don't have to answer it. At what point will I say, the heck with it, I'll find another vendor? For some people, it might be that day. But the point is, if you and I show up at a retailer and we are regularly disappointed with stockouts, we will find another vendor. We'll buy stuff online, we'll go to another retail store. So here's what you lose if you have stockouts. First of all, you lose the sale. Gee, imagine that. Even if your customer comes back, you lost an earlier sale. And the point is, if you lose the customer, not only is that damaging, because the customer is not having this repeat business thing going on with you, but she or he is going to express disappointment to to that person's friends. So stockouts are very expensive. Lost sales, the opportunity cost, and lost customers, and sometimes there's bad will created, there's ill will. People say, don't ever go to Norton's store, he's a dope. He never has the stuff I want. There are challenges with the whole context, the whole domain of doing business online. When Amazon started, I don't remember the exact day. I'm thinking it might have been 1996, so it'd be like 25 years old if I'm right, but let's assume it was 96. When Amazon launched, at its inception, it had a service center in Seattle where it did all the order processing stuff, and it had two warehouses, the only two in the nation. One was West Coast, one was East Coast. So all of Amazon's fulfillment was from those two warehouses. I should have checked before I started filming this video, but Amazon has dozens of warehouses all over the nation now, probably 2 in every state. I would be the least bit surprised. Again, forgive me, I should have done the research, but I neglected to. So my point is, if Amazon has warehouses scattered all over the United States, if you're in Louisville, Kentucky, and they've got one in Covington, that means that it's easy to get something there you in 2 days. But you see the challenge? Not only do you have the order processing, the whole thing about processing the order, packaging, and shipping it, you've got that lag time on delivery. I will often order things from specialty retailers and it's going to come UPS. So if I order something from a company in Texas, 3 or 4 days in the back of a brown truck, makes sense? Yes. Not everything is prime. Not everything is instantaneous. So my point is, the whole challenge of online shopping means that there has to be this order fulfillment. Somebody's got to process the order, stuff it in a box, get it outbound, and then the carrier has to get it to you. And some people's expectations are goofy. They expect things instantly. We live in a microwave culture where people stand in front of the oven and scream at it. How sad is that? But that's a reality. And then the last thing that's worth talking about, and I think that this has been heightened since the coronavirus became a fact of our lives here. I would imagine that probably 30 years ago or so, there was this enormous push all across the world for what we call globalization. You outsource stuff everywhere, you get the best prices, everybody wins. Okay, that didn't happen. And I read an article in the Wall Street Journal sometime in the last week that said for the last decade, there's been a global pushback. Many nations are saying, no, we are going to take care of our citizens first. Love him or hate him. When Donald Trump was a candidate for the presidency, he said, I'm going to make America first, always. And that has been the foundation of every promise he's kept for the last 3 years. America first. That's as it should be. The president of this country's responsibility is to American citizens. But this whole thing about outsourcing, these were decisions that were made 30 years ago, and there were also some things that were happening in this country, which sadly have happily they've been diminished, but they took a hold of our industry for decades. The short version of this part of the conversation is that the American federal government, nobody else bears the blame for this but our federal government, sustained a system of the highest corporate income taxes in the world for decades. The highest corporate income taxes in the world for decades. So if a corporation made a profit, here it paid 39 or more % of that in taxes. If it made the same profit in Ireland, it would pay 11%. So this high corporate tax thing was an enormous challenge. The second thing that's true, and this has been true under most administrations up until President number 45, most administrations have layered on regulation after regulation. And the costs of compliance are so difficult that a lot of companies simply have left business. And then the third thing that is an unfortunate reality, immediately after World War II, there was this enormous push for unionized workforces all across this country. And there was a time, probably in the middle, late 50s, where 35% were more than 1/3 of the private sector workforce was unionized. Right now, loved ones, that's down to 6%. Because what people have realized is unionization drives manufacturing offshore. So if you take those three things coalescing, if you take high corporate taxes, excessive regulation, and unionization, those three things together made a lot of American manufacturers say, we're going to offshore. We're going to make stuff in Sri Lanka or Ireland or China or wherever the case may be. Now, because of the coronavirus, what many of you have discovered is that, unfortunately, I've seen conflicting reports. I've seen reports that suggest as low as 13% or as high as 25% of the pharmaceuticals that we sell and distribute in this country are actually manufactured in the People's Republic of China. And because we've had an active trade war for 2 years, because we will no longer tolerate the theft of intellectual property, espionage for military secrets, coercion with American companies to give up their proprietary tech if they want to do business there. We've been in this trade war for a couple of years, and China has actually threatened not to ship pharmaceuticals here. So what do you think is going to happen with the supply chain? Well, my guess is an awful lot of stuff is going to move back to the United States of America. And that's my point. When you rely on any offshore manufacturing, I don't care where it is in the world, you create this extremely long chain, don't you? and the chain can be broken or interrupted very easily. And we have no control over what factories in China do or what the Chinese government does to businesses that operate there. So we're essentially helpless. So my point is, when you have offshore manufacturing, that poses enormous problems for any company. And that's been, again, when the Wall Street Journal says there's been pushback for 10 years, you know that Britain just left the European Union. I applaud my fellow Britons, my friends, the Britons. They left because they didn't want bureaucrats in Brussels making decisions for them. They wanted Britain to put British citizens first. Germany, earlier this week, stopped the shipment of face masks that were headed to some other country in the EU. Germany stopped them at the German border and turned them back. The German government said, our citizens first. So globalization has had its run, and I think all over the world. I see this in South America, certainly in the United States, I see it in Asia, I see it in Europe. All over the world, nations are pushing back and saying, no, globalization has not benefited our people. We need to take care of our people. So this whole notion of offshore manufacturing is an enormous challenge when it comes to supply chain management.
Now, the next thing that they talk about control in service firms. I was talking about supply chain, which is largely either a retailing environment or a manufacturing environment. It's fair to say that most of you will probably become knowledge workers. You will process data. You'll interpret those data, and you'll make recommendations to someone about what course of action you take. You essentially manipulate knowledge. You bring it to life so that it benefits your firm. Work, the classic definition of work, is moving mass through space. I'm literally going to pick up this mug full of rocket fuel and move it and put it back down. That was work. I moved mass through space. But most of you are going to be knowledge workers. You're going to be banging on keyboards, reading reports, interpreting data, making recommendations. So many of you may very well be in service firm environments. And the dilemma with a service firm environment is the services are rendered on demand. You generally don't have any control whatsoever over the inflow of work. I have friends who are career-long auto techs. There are times that they'll have 4 weeks worth of work sitting in the yard waiting on parts or approval for warranty repairs. There'll be times when their elbows are up on their toolboxes. They got nothing. My wife is a CPA. Her firm has been on mandatory 7 days for about 5 or 6 weeks now. These are 12-hour days, so these kids are all working 85 hours a week. But I practiced as a CPA for 17 years in Atlanta, and I promise you, I could have shut the doors to my firm for 60 days, the months of August and September, and nobody would have known. There was nothing going on that time of year that required any interaction with CPAs, not corporate fiscal year ends, not tax planning, not compliance returns, nothing. So my point is, we can't control, those of us who work in service firms, can't control the flow of work. And that describes so many people. The thing that seems to predict success for service workers, and this is individual, this is not organizational. The thing that seems to predict success for service firms is training and education. If you're well educated, if you're well trained, then you tend to have a successful career. New concept. This is a concept called the balanced scorecard. Oh dear. I'm not sure why this is still making its way into textbooks, but I see current day applications. This was popularized in the middle 80s, I think. I remember studying this when I went back for my MBA, and I went back in 1990 for my MBA. So, and the balanced scorecard says we have to look beyond financial statements to sort of get a holistic picture of what an organization is doing. So the balanced scorecard has 4 component parts. The first one indeed is financial. I'll circle back to all of these. The second one, the customer perspective. Oh dear. Number 3, an internal business perspective. Very useful. Number 4, innovation and learning. So let's take them in order. The financial component has been around since sometime in the 15th century. There was an Italian guy named Pacioli.
who developed the double entry bookkeeping system somewhere in the 1400s. So we've got financial statements going back 600 years. Everybody understands how to read them, how to prepare them. Nothing unusual there. Easy to discern, easy to evaluate. That piece is solid. The customer perspective. This is enormously challenging because, first of all, it's multifaceted. There are so many pieces to the customer perspective, and it's also messy. The data are never discrete, they're never clear cut. So, examples. The things they talk about customer satisfaction and loyalty. Okay, those two things can be divorced. Could I show up at your place and buy a set of tires for my truck and be satisfied with that deal? Could I? Indeed. I could be satisfied with the competencies of your staff, with prices, with everything about it. Does that mean I'm going to come back? It does not. Could I? Of course. But the fact that I'm satisfied with the transaction does not mean that I feel any obligation, any debt of loyalty to you. I could, but the two of those things can be easily disaggregated. Now, think about how powerful, if you had loyal customers, think about how powerful that is. Loyal customers mean two things to any business. The first thing is loyal customers are repeat users. They come back regularly and buy stuff. Well, that's good news. And if somebody is a loyal customer, she or he will be a referral source. If I come to your place and I'm happy with it, I'm going to tell everybody that will listen to me how happy I am with your place. So if you can build a cadre, a clientele of loyal customers, you have repeat purchasers and credible referral sources. Oh my goodness, that is just so wonderful. However, we don't necessarily know how to get there. Some of the things they talk about too, when they talk about the customer perspective, they talk about response time. Well, that's messy because all of us, it's fair to say all of us likely have different expectations. My wife has been practicing as a CPA, I think on the long side now of 35 years. She started doing it right out of college. She jammed an accounting degree into 3 years. She was working, and she did it summa cum laude. She had a 3.96 GPA. She got a B in canoeing. It's probably some jerk like me who gave it. So she was working at a CPA firm at the age of 20. So she's on the long side of 35 years practicing as a CPA. And the point that I'm making to you is, here's a woman who's vastly experienced, who's got extraordinary talent, skill, domain knowledge. But she will from time to time run into people who have goofy expectations. She told me a fun story not recently. I'm filming this in early April of 2020. She told me that a couple came in unannounced, unsolicited, did not have an appointment. They were not existing clients. They walked into the lobby of her firm's building and said they'd like to meet with somebody so that somebody, whomever that person was, could do their tax return. They expected to walk in off the street, have the managing partner of a CPA firm take them on, and they'd walk out in 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, those are goofy expectations. So someone in the firm said, listen, if you'd like to become clients, we're happy to do that. Here's an engagement letter. It sets forth rights and responsibilities, fees, expectations. Here's a questionnaire. You need to fill this out because these are the things that we would need to know to do your return. And when you fill out the questionnaire and return it with the engagement letter, we'll get started. And since it's already April, we will extend you because we're not going to be able to, take in a new customer or a new client rather and prepare a return in a week or something like that. These people were offended. I'm glad they were. So they wheeled and marched out and got their little Prius and rolled off. Just think about response time. What's legitimate? What's normal? What's expected? I don't have answers to any of those things, but you see my point? The dilemma, the challenge that any of us have is many people have unrealistic expectations. Truly. Customer retention. Messy. Important, but messy. I was in business for 17 years, and for 14 of those 17 years, I was a principal. I was an owner of my firm. So I was pretty keen on retention. I mean, that was a really important thing to do because what some companies do, and I've never understood it, is they will just work hard to acquire new customers or clients, but they don't take care of the ones that they have. How stupid is that? But customer retention is hugely important, but there are so many things that influence customer retention. What if I bought a new truck from you, and you expected I would be an ongoing source, but my wife accepted a position in Montana, and we chose to move out there. Am I going to buy a truck from you next year? No. What if the composition of my family changes? What if I'm a single man and I'm married? Now I have different needs. What if I'm a family man and sadly the marriage dissolves? What if I die? You see all these things I'm talking about when I talk about customer retention? You can deliver good services or product or whatever it is that you do, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to retain all of your customers. There will always be some sort of natural attrition. Death, composition of family. Some people leave because they're unhappy. Some people leave because somebody else said they do the same thing for $5 less. Not everyone is loyal. So customer retention inarguably is valuable, but it is so unpredictable. It truly is. It's important, but it's difficult to wrap around. So again, the customer perspective is both multifaceted and it's messy. There's nothing simple or discrete about it. The third thing that they talk about in this balanced scorecard is the internal business perspective. Fundamentally, what you do is you answer one question. In our business, where must we excel? What do we have to do uncommonly well to earn a place in the market where people are repeat customers, they're well pleased, they refer others? Well, this is a Principles of Management class, and later in your college career, probably a year and a half or so, maybe two, you will take a course in strategy, BUSA 4131, where you study strategic management. And in your strategy course, you'll study the resource-based view. It was developed about 30 years ago by a guy named Jay Barney. He, at the time, was at Ohio State. Go Buckeyes. And the resource-based view was developed as a theory that was meant to predict firm profitability, and it does it uncommonly well. But within a couple of years of it being out there, it was conceptualized and reported out and critiqued and improved and tested empirically. Within a few years of it hitting the street, we realized that the resource-based view had other uses. You could use it to identify merger acquisition partners. You could use it to identify places where you should outsource, because what the resource-based view focuses on is it answers the same question. What are your distinctive competencies? What do you do uncommonly well? Well, if you don't do something well, maybe the best thing you can do is to outsource it. Or you could develop the competency yourself. You can invest in yourself. Or you can acquire a firm that already does that well. So my point is, when you talk about this internal business perspective, where must we excel? Here's what I think is a useful example. Let's assume that I decide to open a casual dining restaurant in Statesboro. And right now, the cuisine doesn't matter. It could be standard American, it could be Mex, it doesn't matter. I'm going to open a casual dining restaurant, not a fast food franchise, not fine dining, a casual dining place. And you know how big that tent is. IHOP, the Longhorns, all those places are casual dining. So, in my view, I have to do two things uncommonly well. The first is I have to give you a really good experience in the dining room. The place has got to be nice. The hostess has to greet you. The server has to treat you well. Everything about your experience in the dining room needs to hit all the marks. Excellence on every dimension. The second thing that I have to do uncommonly well, I have to excel at this. I have to have a great kitchen staff. I've got to have talented people who care, who are going to consistently perform well, who are going to work well together. We'll deal with problems if they come up. So the two places where I have to excel in my casual dining restaurant, I have to give you a great experience in the dining room, and I've got to put darn good food on your plate every time you come in here. So that's where my emphases will be. Kitchen staff and the dining room. That's what I have to do uncommonly well, not just to survive, but to prevail, to get market share, to grow, to be successful. Now, there are a lot of other functions in my restaurant that don't have that same criticality. Think about this. If I'm a single store operation, I have one restaurant here in the borough, do I have to have an accounting staff? I do not. For all of my important accounting, I can outsource that to a CPA firm, can't I? They can reconcile my bank statements, provide me with a general ledger, financial statements, file compliance reports, tax returns, W-2s at the end of the year, a corporate tax return. Those are all really important services. I don't need to have that capability in-house. I'll pay a few $1,000s a year to a competent CPA firm. Similarly, do I have to have a payroll clerk? I do not. I could use anybody. I could use ADP, Paychecks, anybody in the business of making payroll. Provide them with input, hours worked, tip income, whatever the case may be. And then they will generate the paychecks and they'll do all the compliance stuff. So my point is, in my restaurant, there are two places where I have to excel, the dining room and the kitchen. I will do other things well too, but my point is, the other things are less critical. I don't need to have those competencies under my roof. I can outsource them, can I? And that's kind of the point. When you look at yourself internally, where must we excel? And you need to do that. When you decide on the areas where you must excel, you need to excel. The fourth part, innovation and learning, I struggle with it, and you'll see why in a moment. Both of those things, when they say learning, they're talking about organizational learning. The dilemma, I mean, that's very important to note. Are we innovative? Do our people learn? Do we capture? Do we transfer? Whatever organizational learning we have. The dilemma is everything that's introduced as a measure of innovation and organizational learning are essentially metrics that come right out of human resource management. Here are the things that they talk about. They talk about employee satisfaction, employee retention, employee productivity. Every one of those things is a key construct in the domain of human resource management. It has nothing to do with either innovation or organizational learning. So the dilemma here in this balanced scorecard thing is the people that created it said, here's what we want to measure. We want to measure innovation and learning, but they want to measure this and they measure that. They measure these HR metrics, employee satisfaction, productivity, turnover, retention. So when you do one thing and say another, there's never a good outcome. So my point is that the balanced scorecard has four components. The financial piece, solid. The customer perspective, messy. The internal business perspective, really important. Innovation and learning. We don't measure and report on what we identify as important. So it's very, very difficult. Though this has been out for 30 years or so, very, very few private sector organizations use it. Very few. Because it's very difficult to operationalize and it doesn't add a lot of value. Now, we have a short discussion about financial controls. And these are formal controls. The first thing I want to point about, I want to talk briefly about financial statements. Financial statements are always, 100% of the time, they are historical documents. They look back at a closed period. The quarter ended March 31st. The 6 months ended June 30th. The fiscal year ended December 31st. They always look back at a closed period, and then they report those data. So if you're reading a set of annual financial statements, some of the data, some of the pieces of information are 14 or 15 months old. So there are almost zero managerial insights. Nobody uses historical financial statements to make operating decisions. They are primarily developed for third-party readers, for the IRS, for banks, for the SEC. If it's a publicly held company, that would be the Securities and Exchange Commission level. It's not the Southeastern Conference. So financial statements are always historical, and again, they have almost no managerial value. Their value is to third-party readers. Budgets are another formal financial control, and I know you realize this, but I just want to make it explicit. All budgets begin life as forecasts, as projections. We think this is going to happen. We are projecting sales of X or costs of Y or whatever the case may be. So the foundation of a budget is some futuristic projection. So the challenge, this is essential because I've done an awful lot of work with budgeting in the days that I've practiced as a CPA. The fundamental piece about budgeting is if you're going to project in the future, you have to develop and declare what your significant forecast assumptions are. Why did I say sales will be 80,000 in period 1, 120,000 in period 2, and whatever in period 3? How did I arrive at those estimates? Because if my forecast assumptions are bogus, anything I put on the paper is bogus. So just appreciate the fact that when budgets begin life, 100% of the document is a projection into the future. It is an estimate. Now, when that period is closed, we then gather actual data and we compare the actual results with the forecast amounts, and that's where we have this variance thing. So my point is that budgets are formal documents. They're done at every level of the organization, but they begin life as projections, as forecasts. And that means that there will always be some deviation, always. It's just we don't know how much. Surprisingly short conversation on quality. There's a discussion about Deming's principles. Deming was he was actually a statistician. But he took his talent, he took his knowledge, and he applied it to quality measures, and he was uncommonly, some of his work is seminal. William Deming himself, went to Japan right after World War II ended, and he meaningfully helped Japanese industry and Japanese government get a handle on the whole concept of quality. He taught them statistical processing controls and other things as well. But the truth is, quality is a culture, it's a way of life. Deming says, these are his principles. We have to respond to the needs of the customers. We have to improve continuously. Whatever we do should lead to both an increased market share and increased employment. Gee, imagine that. And we should have to use data. Our decisions have to be data-driven. So those are Deming's principles, and the contributions he made were stunning. If I were in a classroom setting, if I had a whiteboard, I could do this on the side of my garage, but I tried getting the Sharpie off once, and it's a mess. I had to repaint it. There's a wonderful demonstration I could do, but I simply cannot do it today, perhaps another time. So again, William Deming had an enormous impact. There have been others as well, Duran and a whole bunch of other people. Quality for most organizations should be a competitive weapon. It really should. Because if you make anything, if you deliver service or manufacture a product, and it's substandard, it's low quality, am I going to buy it a second time? I'm going to say, no, I bought some of that stuff and it was crap. Just crumbled in my hands. I'll never buy anything from them again. So if you are perceived as having quality below the industry's expectations, people will leave you and they'll migrate to other firms who hold themselves to higher quality standards. Quality is a competitive weapon. No matter where you are, you need to insist on it. That people adopt that culture and that people produce those results. Everything needs to be focused on quality, on continuous improvement. There's one other thing in this discussion on quality that I want to share with you. I hate it that it was even in our textbook. There's a European organization, it goes by 3 letters, ISO, India Sierra Oscar, ISO, European organization, and I think it means International Standards or something like that. I should have looked it up, but I don't. I didn't rather. Most of the businesses in Europe will not do business with anybody unless they're ISO certified. Here's what ISO certification is. Any American company can get ISO certified. I see trucks driving all over the place that say we are ISO 9001 certified or whatever the case may be. That is a false promise. Because ISO certification, in whatever form it takes, is simply documentation. Somebody wrote a careful, thoughtfully, systematically developed document that said, here's how we do stuff. So, the fact that I can write something down never is even remotely equivalent to me doing it. Remember I told you that Belichick is trying to get me to play for the Pats? And I might, I don't know. Could I write down the process of me completing a touchdown pass? Heck yeah. I step up to the center, call the signal, take the snap, drop back in the pocket, read the defense, pick the receiver that's got the highest probability of me making a completed pass, and then with this cannon of an arm, I throw a precise 70-yard pass on his numbers. And of course he gets a touchdown and we win the Super Bowl yet again. Brady will have 6 rings and I'll probably just have 1. If I take Belichick's offer. I
haven't decided. You see my point? I can write that process down, can't I? Call signals, take the snap, drop back, read, throw. I can write down the process. I can document it. You think I could do it? What do you think? Not likely, is it? So my point is, ISO certification means that you, some company, documented a process, how you do things. And Europeans take that as a measure of quality, and that is a big pile of poo. If I knew how to do the poo emoji, I'd put it up on the screen, but I don't, and I don't need to. So my point is that ISO is a false promise. Well that you know that. So now, I'm at the end of session 27, and I know you're cheering right now. I can hear the applause breaking out all over this nation. Yes, Norton is through. I'm so excited. Here's the question, the attendance verification question. If I accept Belichick's offer to join the Pats as the starting quarterback, how old will I be in the fall of 20? All right, we're done for the day. I'll be back with you soon. Work hard. Be safe. Love you.